we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation while asking the question, is anything what it seems? Based on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what the podcast is all about. I also hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel, Better Than Not, so I can continue to bring you great guests like we have today. I'm your host, Doug Gardam, and today it's a pleasure to welcome back Michael Butler to Better Than Not. Michael, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
I am too. I was going to say this has been a fun time. Michael, if you haven't seen the previous episode, Michael's a PhD in astrophysics with a specialty in quantum gravity. Don't let that scare you, because Michael will put it into terms that will make it quite a bit clearer, actually. We originally met at the Apologetics Conference here earlier this year in Abbotsford, BC, and he was putting on a presentation on God and science, which, if you've paid attention to either my Substack or previous episodes of Better Than Not, you'll know fascinates me. And so it's so fun to be able to talk to a scientist that actually has grounding in this area. So again, welcome, Michael, and this is kind of going to be fun, I think. But I was thinking back to our last conversation, and I was wondering, do you remember the first time that, I'll say, God and science connected for you? Because I'm kind of surprised that it took so long for me. And I'm wondering, was there a time where you just say, "Oh, that makes sense," or do you remember something like that?
I don't know if there was a single moment that sort of it clicked. I'd say it was more like going downhill almost, where I just started to pick up momentum. And eventually I sort of realized where I was going with everything. But I don't think there was like one thing that really made it stand out for me.
Did 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 the I'll say, through maybe reading the Bible as a youngster or a teen, begin to turn the wheels that this is connected to, I'll say, the science that I'm learning in school? Because for me, they were almost always separated. If you know what I mean, it was like you can't hold both of them. Like, you're either going to be in the science world that took me down the engineering path, or you're kind of like you're going to church and you have faith in God. And it was like, but the two of them don't connect. And it was like a few years ago, I started to write about this, and I'm thinking, I wonder how Michael looks at this. And it's kind of interesting how you described it as kind of going downhill.
Yeah, I think it was the same for me, especially at the start, right? Whether you're sort of in that church sphere, right? They treat them as separate. And then when you start looking at science from an academic point of view, they treat them as separate, right? Even if somebody does have those beliefs, like it's very much science at work and faith on the weekends or whatever it might be.
Right, right.
Yeah, and so it wasn't until I started asking sort of deeper questions
Okay.
about sort of philosophy and um like they're both religion and science are trying to explain the world, but on the surface it looks like different things about the world, but you realize there's going to be a lot of overlap, and so the worldviews do have to sort of knit together. And it was starting to explore that process where I
Ah,
realized that they're sort of built for each other.
okay. Interesting. When you describe it as like two worlds, like worldviews, like both are trying to describe the world. you kind of think there has to be that connection there in a way, and like I'll say after, not like during the process, but like after you kind of go, okay, there is this. They're both describing the world. There's got to be some things connecting here. Interesting.
Yeah, well, and you know, it's just usually not obvious because with religion, you are, assuming things like God exists, and that is very fundamental, right? And that's going to inform what
Uh-huh.
kind of universe you're going to get from a God who's intelligent and specifically creating versus some sort of other process. And so, unless you start connecting the dots, you don't necessarily see how those things are going to interface.
Well, it's interesting that this something happened this summer to me. I was doing a Hebrew study, and we were in Hebrews 11, and it's the faith chapter, right? I learned later that it's like the Hall of Fame of faith, so to speak. I guess it's kind of wow, I didn't anticipate that happening. Not move my arms so much, but in 11 it starts with talking that faith is the assurance of hope and the conviction of things unseen. I'm not phrasing that completely correctly, but it's something like that. But you go to the verse 3, and it has something. Yet faith is the how do I? You might even know this verse, but because it demonstrated so much to me, Michael, of science. But it's the understanding that the universe is created by the Word of God, and what is seen is made out of things that are not visible. And I thought, in that like 12 words, that's the whole thing of science to me. It was stunning, in fact, because I'm saying, like, you study science, the material world is all seen, right? That we see it, but yet we learn through science that it's made out of things that we actually can't see. So atoms. And I said, this is in 11:3 of Hebrews of the New Testament? Are you kidding me? So that really started to, and this is like 6 months ago, Mike. So that's why I said, okay, when I talk to Michael again, I'm going to phrase this a little bit, because I was shocked that it's kind of that thing where your eyes are open and your ears are opened, and now you can see it. Why you didn't see it before?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you get familiar with some of the practices in science, like we describe everything analytically with mathematics, it's all abstract, it's all unseen, but
Yes.
it's also very useful and very good at doing what it does. And yeah, it's very interesting that you like the philosophies align there, right? Where your biblical philosophy is making those assumptions, and you sort of have to assume that to do science as well,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, you can't trust that the math is going to work, or at least be reliable, right? Continue to work. So,
Well, I think I heard John Lennox say that to be a mathematician, you have to believe in the intelligibility of the universe. Like,
yeah, very much so.
if you don't have that, then it makes it very difficult. And so this is where, for me, it started to fit together, from the science perspective, because of, well, we kind of go back to gravity, and how, for me, it was like gravity is kind of seen as one of the fundamental forces, so to speak. And the last time we talked, like, we still really don't know what gravity is, but I mean, we find out very quickly if we step off the edge of a cliff or a building, right? Gravity's there, and it's one of those things to me that it's not seen, but it's real, and the effects of it are kind of real. Like, you can see them, and it was phrased to me the other day about comparing God with gravity, and how we'll easily believe gravity because we see the impact of it, but you don't necessarily you don't understand the impact of God. I think is probably the bigger word. because something created gravity. And so those were things that started to kind of fit together for me, that like in the afterward now, like you kind of go back and understand how things fit. You have been able to get to do that in your career because you kind of had to fit those together in what you're doing. But I found that like a real fascinating thing. And so I wanted to throw it by you to see how that fit together in some of your thinking with regards to how, because it's funny how these verses start to reveal things that I never saw before. And that 11:3 of Hebrews, like it almost shocked me because it's like, it doesn't say Adam, but it's saying what you see is made out of things that aren't visible. Like, and that's written what, 2,000 years ago?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm usually fairly cautious going about it that way around,
Mm.
um, because I don't want to infer something that the text might not have meant specifically. But I
Okay.
don't. But I think it is very useful to go about it the other way still, because there's consistency,
Hmm.
right? And you need a consistent worldview, a consistent foundation to do proper science, right? And I don't want to say that you can't go about it that way either, like how you're looking at it. And I know, is it Ross? He does
Oh, Hugh
apologetics.
Ross.
He's the
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I know he does that in his book, where he's looking at verses and making discrete connections to the science. And yeah, I'm maybe a little more cautious about that,
I like
but
that.
what I really look for is consistency, right? I want to make sure there's compatibility between worldviews. And I would contend that this Christian worldview is one, if not the only one, that is consistent with what you need for science.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, in the sense, even historically, I think it comes out of the Christian view, right? And
Yeah,
and
yeah, very much so.
and it's,
Um,
yep.
yeah, and I mean the history. I'm not a historian, and you have groups of people without Christianity doing science-like things, but not necessarily the
Mm-hmm.
complete package, right? Where you're developing both abstract frameworks and you're actually applying them to do science, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sort of getting both of those together is a rarity and really flourished within sort of that Christian culture.
I like that idea when you describe that, because it's sometimes it's easy to kind of, once it fits together in your way of logic. When I say your way, I'm talking specifically about the person who's evaluating it, right? But that does have bias with it, right? That you're not even necessarily conscious of, which kind of comes back to the importance of science, right? Because I think in many
Yeah.
ways, and I kind of almost go back to the story of the Tower of Babel, in the sense of building a tower to go to reach God. And in a sense, and I'd like to know how you think of this. Um, is science in a way trying to demonstrate that, the actuality of that? Not going back to the Tower of Babel, but when you're thinking of science as in, what are we looking at, 15th, 16th century? They developed before then, but when we started to really feel formula, I'm thinking of Isaac Newton and his gravity perspective. And then um, I've read quotes where he gives thanks to the glory of God in his discovery of gravity versus saying, I've discovered gravity. I don't know whether that's accurate or not either. But
Yeah, I'm not sure about that particular quote. Do you think you could sort of bring the whole question together? Just make sure I didn't miss something there.
no, it's one of the things is trying to bring the material. Like, this is where for me, with science and God, like the Bible is kind of written with the idea that faith is believing without seeing. And much of the Bible to me is written with that in mind. When I come with a foundation of mine originally from science, it was don't believe it unless you can see it, which to me is the naturalist, the kind of material part of what science brought to us, right? Like we're going to only investigate the naturalist, the material, the what's they call it, naturalistic methodology, I think, in the Darwin time. And we would just, that's why, to me, much of the spiritual metaphysic world is not necessarily the science review. And so for me, kind of really diving into the Bible after my science foundation, I'm constantly bouncing back and forth. And that's why I said, like, I think it's interesting when um, a person who's very well grounded in science can now look at that and say, um, you've got to be careful with that. That's why I really liked what you said about Hebrews 11:3. It's written almost in a poetic way. That's not science, right? But when you say everything that is seen was not made out of things that are that are visible, that clicks to my mind of atoms with that we can't see. Even though under the microscope, or we've now been able to develop technology to do that, I jump to the Tower of Babylon because I think of that being a materialistic structure that we built to go to what was thought of as, well, we can actually reach heaven, or we can actually reach and touch God. And that's why I was like, to me, science has kind of come out of that, trying to demonstrate the, I'll say, actuality of that. And so with your background in the things, I always find it interesting saying, well, you either completely agree or you have checks on it. And when you immediately said 11:3, you got to be careful with how that's interpreted. That's the bias that kind of comes. I don't know whether I'm phrasing that any better for you, Michael, or not. But
Yeah, well, I think I've got a bit more of a sense of what you're getting at now. Um, yeah, I think science, when we look backwards at the Bible and you've got that sort of science framework in place, you realize that a lot of what you're looking at is assumptions that you made to do the science in the first place. Right. And one of the things I really like about that is if you make certain assumptions and they make correct predictions, that is evidence that supports the assumptions, right? Even if you
right,
can't prove the assumptions themselves, because there's something about the success of, certain pieces of knowledge that adds credibility to them. Um, so I think there is some synergy there, even though it's not necessarily direct.
when you're in the world of quantum gravity, um, well, maybe I should, before we go into questioning that, maybe we should give a description of what we're talking about when you say quantum gravity, because it's like it's easy to say gravity and just connect it with the word quantum, but that's not quite what it is.
No, so quantum gravity, I like to think of it in two different ways. There's the problem of quantum gravity, and then there's a bunch of theories of quantum gravity that try and solve the problem. And so it's usually helpful to describe the problem first. And
Mm,
so the problem in this case is that when you have a lot of gravity and you're trying to do quantum mechanics, our models break. Right. So trying to do a lot of gravity in really small scales and have everything work doesn't work out well. So this doesn't necessarily say anything about reality. It just says something about our models not being
mm.
complete for certain cases. Um, but as we developed explanations, and so there's lots of them, there's things like string theory, M theory with quantum gravity, those suggest that there's a lot more to reality than what we first assumed with our other models. And so that's where you get these ideas where, quantum gravity is changing the way we look at things, right? and it often involves things like the theory of everything, which
Hmm.
is that's our string theories and M theories, and unification principles. And so, yeah, I don't know if I'm rambling here, but the short version is there's a problem, right? Our physics doesn't seem to work together. So there's the two areas, and then there's a bunch of solutions, which may or may not tell us something about reality. We don't know. Um, yeah.
So if I'm to break that a little bit further down, we have this idea, and I kind of started with that, of gravity. That if we hold a stone out and drop it, it falls to the ground. And I'll say many would just, why does it fall to the ground? Well, gravity's got hold of it, and it, without anything supporting it, it's going to fall to the ground or the next place that's going to stop it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we really don't know why it does that.
Yes and no.
Okay, good.
So a lot of this comes down to how you interpret the model, right? So if you assume general relativity is correct, then we do have an explanation kind of what gravity is, right? It is the curvature of space-time. That takes a while to unpack, but
Hmm.
we do have a cause, but it's not clear that that is the explanation. And so that's where things like quantum gravity come in, because now we're building a new model for both gravity and quantum mechanics. And that might tell us something different about what gravity is. So a lot of this is really what about the model you're calling ontologically real, right? What is a feature of reality in the
Hmm.
mathematics? And that isn't always clear, and it's also notoriously difficult to prove in some instances.
So when you take those, when you're in this and looking at this from a thought experiment, a thought thinking, does this was created by something come to you, like, and that we're so challenged in trying to figure out what it is? Like, Einstein came a long way with his relativity, right? In trying to understand that.
I don't know if I would automatically jump to it was created,
Okay, okay.
but I do sort of look at that and think that it's very it's a very weird coincidence that we have the ability to describe it as well as we do, right? And to build a model that is able to make such successful predictions, right? So even if that particular feature isn't intentional,
Mhm.
right? It does sort of hint at a lot of other things that are like very improbable, right? And like we were saying earlier, the intelligibility, right?
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
can understand what this is, we have access to it, we can test it. We have mathematics that we can use to model it. And, that wasn't necessarily clear at the time. And so all of these things are coming together and we can do something with it. And that's quite spectacular on its own,
Mhm.
right? And so, yeah, I don't know if I would say automatically created, but it is one more thing sort of on the list of things that are big coincidences about the universe that, you know, are we wouldn't expect humans to be able to make sense of.
Well, there's also that part that how it all fits together. Like I know the term clock has been used often, right? Like and and yet you think of the infinity of how it all fits together. I'm using infinity because I don't know how else to describe it, because it's like everything you go into seems to work that way. And this is, again, comes back to where the world of science started to bridge into how it all fits so perfectly together. Like, whether you go cosmos or you go to subatomic, it just it all still fits together. and it's like you bring there's an intelligibility to it because it does fit together. And then you can stare out the window and you see the plants and trees, and they all grow on their own. They grow without, and it all fits together like perfectly to give us a beautiful flower, a rose. And I'm awed by that, but I'm also awed by the science part of it, the mathematics that we've been able to figure out and keep figuring out to unprecedented levels to me. So that's why I said it's neat when you're trying to see how that all comes together, and then I'll see, like I said, a verse in the Bible that kind of even captures it to a certain extent that I didn't know that was kind of like that before. So that's not really a question, Michael, but it's one of those things that I'm always intrigued of how the science mind kind of takes those and stretches them. Like I use the Tower of Babel because I always think of that as one of those kind of explanations that we felt we could figure it out. And then of course the story of it is, well, there's a wrath that came along once we even tried.
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to things like abstract theory and methodology like science, we've already gone so far as hitting things like scientism, right? And then realized that that isn't a very useful worldview,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it sort of came crashing down regardless. So, yeah, I do like the synergy there where, it is easy to turn something like science into our own tower. And thankfully, we've moved past that point, hopefully.
Yes, no doubt. So switching a little bit, you gave me a little bit of sense as you're working in the data area today,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
we
at
we
least temporarily.
we crossed into in our last conversation the artificial intelligence world, the AI world, and what it was meaning. Because since I've talked to you the last time, it's become a bigger portion of my world because I just use it a lot more than I anticipated. I find it very useful, for example, in helping me to, I'll say, decipher parts of the Bible. I use it, and now it's like you have a certain sense of is this coming back correct in essence, like, oh, that's way off. But does it give me something to connect to or grounding that, oh, I didn't see it that way. But I also are beginning to use it for a lot of things that are very practical. So one of the things that I'm finding very useful today is, and this is a bit technical in the thing, but in the podcast world, creating shorts. And now they are taking, and I think they're using kind of trending data and information that they can come together and they can create, I'll say, when I say a short, it's like a 15 to 30-second part of like a longer, like a podcast that we're doing right now. And it can connect it with something that might be said, like that's trending or something to that effect, and pull it out. And it does that automatically. Like, and that's AI, right? That's putting it kind of together. So I thought, well, if you're working kind of in that area a little bit, maybe you could give some insight of where you might see some of that actually heading. And is it a scary thing or is it a like an embracing thing? Something that like this is not, there's always a dark side to everything, but is there a bright side in what you see, even extending it to your field of quantum gravity and being able to understand some of those things better? Because it's hard to keep all of the information at once in our heads.
Yeah, I mean,
I
there's
know
a
that's a
lot of
multifaceted question, Michael, but
yeah. I there's going to be a lot of different ways of breaking that down, right? And there's so many questions around AI as emerging technology as well. And so things like just the legality of it.
mm,
So for example, if I wanted to put in a bunch of papers that I'm using and use some sort of LLM to find certain mentions of a topic, that would technically violate the publisher's copyright,
yes.
right? Especially if it's going to the cloud and being used for training purposes and
Yep.
stuff like that. Like that, that isn't legal, right?
Yep.
And there's the question of should it be, or do we need to come up with some other kind of arrangement?
Interesting.
Um,
Hmm.
I think for me personally, I'm more concerned with the efficacy of the tools, right? And this is probably biased a bit because I tend to play around with them for more technical applications, right? And more specific knowledge, especially in science.
Hmm.
And that is not where they do well, right? That is largely where they tend to get the details wrong and fail. So in that, my sort of takeaway is that they are good for people who know the job that it's
Hmm.
doing, right? And so when they get the result, they know if it was done correctly or not. And so as an accelerator for people's workflows, I think that's where they're going to shine, at least in the short term. But replacing people altogether without that sort of check, even for simple tasks, they sometimes hallucinate. They sometimes introduce things you don't expect. And so I think that's really where we need to be a bit more cautious. But
You,
at the
you,
same time, the market is pushing us towards, replace people, right? Replace jobs with these AI. And so I think we're going to have a short term sort of chaotic period as we figure out exactly where this technology excels.
I like how you articulated that, Mike, because it is kind of how I see it benefiting, and that's where I see the job situation being affected, because like almost everything that I do that I've kind of used it as in a way a research assistant for finding things that would take otherwise literally hours to do, you can compact it, but you can't just let it go. If you follow, and that's exactly what you just said, is it 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 takes that and compresses the amount of time. By and large, I find what I'm looking for is not um, on the edge of technology like you're describing that the errors happen, but it's known information that you're trying to pull out from wherever it's available. And um, I'm finding often, well, almost always, I find you have to review it. Like you have to. That's not how I would have written it. Like there's another example of things that are tough. Doing summaries, like summarize that chapter. One of the things I don't like to do, just because it's not something that that like comes to me kind of automatically, and it's great at doing that, but you still have to go and review it because, well, that 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 doesn't work, or the style that they're using is not a style that you would use, right? Or they found something that works, so they use it all the time, and then it becomes very repetitive, as an example. So you kind
Yeah.
of nailed it when you said that's kind of where it's useful, but that's as a company perspective, that becomes like rather than having 10 people to do your research and having somebody check it, you need one person and a person checking it, or just the person checking it, because it's I find it so fast is kind of the part that I find amazing. And I guess I'm kind of looking at it as um I it's not going to go away.
No,
Like,
the cat is out of the bag. Yeah, absolutely.
so it's like how do you more fully embrace this, and it's kind of in a way like I heard that it was comparable to the last 50 years of things that have been introduced. It's going to eclipse that effect on humankind. So from things like the internet, computers, all of those things. Again, Michael, this is an offhand quote. There's no quantification to this. This is kind of like you hear the technology in my phone is beyond what they had to go to the moon with. What a great statement. But has anyone really quantified that? Like, I don't know, but it sounds like a good statement, right? So it's one of those things that's here, and I've begun to find kind of very useful things for it when you're, especially when you're researching things that are not state of the art.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, if you're doing something and you know what the details need to be, so like if you're summarizing and
Right.
you know which details need to be mentioned and it's not picking up those ones, you know that you can make changes or, change your prompt around. But if you don't, right, or if you're learning a topic for the first time, right, and
Yeah.
this is where it's being used a lot, this is probably where I'm more concerned because it
Yes.
is producing information and people are using that information, right? They're not checking its sources, they're not
Yeah.
using, other links. They're just taking it at face value, and that's their source. And this is just not a truth-driven technology, right? It is very much statistics of the data, and so even if you prompt something a little differently, you might get a very, very different answer, right? Because
No.
it's very much driven by the structure of the prompt, right? And it doesn't have comprehension of the prompt. It's just going by all of the statistics of the combination and ordering of words you use.
Well, this is kind of, I think, and Google's kind of started this all for us, or the search engines, right? Because we actually think it's thinking. Like, we actually think it's a being. You get used to it. Ask it a question, it'll come back. And this is just taking that to another level. Um, being from the academic world, how do you see this? Because to me, that's a problem that's it's not part of my world. But I can see that being an enormous issue because of how easy it is. Like, who wouldn't want something that can give you the answer to everything?
Yeah, and I mean, there's been some studies and surveys done at this point now too, and the number of students that are admitting they've used AI in their work in some way is pretty high. It's usually around 70 to 80%,
Oh, wow.
and you know it's interesting too because you can ask follow-up questions like, "Do you consider this cheating?" And most of them agree it is cheating, right? Representing this as their own work.
Right.
So I think part of it is education, and it needs to start really early, right? We need to drive home that yes, you can get the computer to do your work for you, but then you aren't really learning, right? And that defeats the whole purpose.
Hmm.
Um, I also think education's going to have to change, right? And so that time-tested model of here is a paper topic, you go home, you write your paper, that's probably done long term,
You
right?
mean when
Because
you say done, like it's over, you can't
it's
really.
over. Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably won't be seeing that in a lot of education going forward because, it's just too easy for somebody to go onto ChatGPT or whatever and just ask, write me a paper and hand that in.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. I might have given you this question the last time, but I had been reading where someone was saying, and this is a typical, I'll call it education question, but go and compare styles of, for example, let's compare two styles of two musicians. Compare Miles Davis with John Coltrane. And I'd like you to do a 1,500 word essay on that or whatever it would be. And in my sense, I'm not super excited about doing that exercise because it's a lot of work and I'm not really creating anything new with it. Like, it's not like I'm going to create my own song. I'm not going to create my own lyric. Um, and I'm going to come away with a lot of interesting information on Coltrane and Miles Davis. No question about that. but what it's going to take me to put that together in the world 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. Now I can put that question in and literally, probably in seconds, have a completed 1,500-word essay that's probably way past anything I could spend 80 hours at doing. That is very tempting.
Well, and I think part of the issue is that students will look at that and they put the value on the product, the outcome,
Yes.
not what they're gaining from creating it. And so, yeah, the paper might be a really dull topic for you, but you're learning how to structure your thoughts, right? Construct a logical argument that is
Mhm.
grounded in cited sources. And I mean, you're learning a lot of procedural things about how to cite sources and how to format all of that,
Yes.
which is very useful if you continue on in education. And so there's those kinds of learnings that you're not getting by just
Right.
producing the product. So yeah, I think that goes back to the whole education thing,
Right.
because in the past we really didn't have to emphasize what are you gaining from this exercise. We knew they were going to gain it because there was no other way, and so you could just sort of assign the thing. But now we almost have to do this. We have to point to sort of that meta of education a bit more, potentially for students to underline the value of the exercises.
And that will be a challenge because often, and this is what I find later, what you learn, like I said, we've been talking science and Bible as an example. It comes to light and you really want to understand what you're going through. It's not like I'm just trying to get through my 4-year program so I can go and get the job, right? Or something to that effect, which is, I think I'm a product of that world for sure. Like it's just one of those things. And how does that sense get to you, like you said, from the learning perspective? Like, because when you're going through that in an education program to get whatever it might be, an engineering degree, a science degree, um, you want to get to the real thing, so to speak. How is this gonna help me? And it's almost like I don't know that I can actually explain it to you how it's gonna help you at this point in time because you haven't experienced that yet. You know what I mean? Like it's like explain to me a mortgage when I'm 14 years old, as an example, and 10 or 15 or 30 years before I'm actually going to get one. Like, unless you're interested in math or something, that's probably not going to be something that's going to be that interesting to do. I'm going to do it because I need it to get my grade, to get my whatever it is. Do you follow what I'm saying? And I'm
Yeah,
interested in your world from the academic world. I see this as a staggering shift and challenge because it's been there for so long, and it's like this new, it's hard to even call it a tool, is almost wiping that out. Because how do you, like you said, what, 75 to 80% of students had admitted that they've used
and I mean those were just the ones that were honest on the
it.
survey, right? And I don't know
Yeah,
enough
yeah,
about the statistics of how all that
right.
pans out, but yeah, it
But
could be higher.
I'm just thinking of human nature, Michael. Like it's just like, um, and I like to have this overall thing that it will make more and more people do what they're really meant to do, rather than what they're going to do to get a job, as an example, right? I think that's a little, like a little, what do you want to call it? Too virtuous.
Yeah, 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 I'd call it optimistic. Um,
Okay, yeah, that's a good way. Yes.
like you were saying before, I think humans have this very strong disposition towards doing the easy thing, right?
Hmm.
And that is often a healthy thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Instead of, taking in the field with a scythe, we now have combines, right? Allowing us to do a lot more with our time. That's a good thing
Yes.
generally.
Yes.
Um, but when it comes to education, right? And especially education that for years has put so much emphasis on the outcome, right? The mark, the grade, the assignment, the paper, whatever it is, and not on you, right? Not on your own learning.
Ah.
I think the easy route is just going to dominate. And so, like you said, I do think it is going to be a shift. I think education is going to have to move to making sure that the student understands that the outcome is them, not the thing that they're currently doing. But how you do that, I don't know. And there's a reason we weren't doing that before because,
Mhm.
like you were saying, it's not easy. But I think we're going to have to find ways of doing that. And in the short term, you're just going to see a lot of standard tools that were used in education go away. Right. So I know lots of
Mhm.
professors are not doing assigned writing assignments anymore. It'll be all in class, all in workshops, right?
Already.
Already. Yeah. Because, when you are you're living, like your profession is language, right? It becomes very obvious to those people when somebody has used AI because it has a
Mm.
very specific way of talking. It has a very
Yes.
specific sort of cadence, and it almost keeps like a beat. Like if you read AI generated text, it has a flow that you don't see with humans typically. And so for somebody who does that as a profession, it's very noticeable. And I think they're just very tired of being able to point out AI writing,
Mm.
but not prove it, right? And then,
Yes.
there's no real recourse for them to address that directly.
And to your point, when it's generated and no one's checked it, they've just said this is all right, and then they just hand it in, and away we go to something that I want to do. Like I put my VR set on or whatever, and do the whatever that thing is that attracts us more than the actual work that we're supposed to be doing. Because I think if that was used as like that's kind of how I found it very useful. Is it's not the format that comes back in the nice sentence structure. It's the information that you want to put into what you're writing, if you follow what I mean. That you still have to go and research, right? And I find it just like I'm thinking today, um, in the I'll say the higher levels of education, that could become even more difficult in finding people that are actually um, and maybe it's not because I'm not from that part. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit more, Michael. But in finding someone that's really truly wants to be a scientist, um, they're probably not going to be looking at shortcuts so much as the person that just wants to get those letters behind their name so they can get the job. If you follow what I mean, like it's there's a purity there that's missing.
Yeah, I mean there's going to be some students that are like that. I think part of the issue is that our system is structured in a way that's very competitive. And they can't
Yeah.
necessarily compete with the students that are using AI, especially in those early years. As you go further into your coursework and things get very detail specific or detail orientated, that's where AI starts to fall off in how reliable it is.
Hmm.
But when you're trying to compete for like a scholarship in those early undergrad years, they're at a disadvantage if
Yeah.
they're not using the tools, even if they have the passion to do it themselves.
It's it's almost like steroids in sport. Like it's when you just as you described it, that's the first thing that came to me. Like there's that echelon that just could not compete, right? And then they come in with ways of being able to control that so you can't do it. But it was like because I think a few years ago back in the cycling world, right, where with the Lance Armstrong fiasco and everything, it was almost like they said everyone was doing it because you couldn't compete. You still have to work really hard. Like I think this is the part that's kind of forgotten. Like you still have to work. You still have to put in the miles and stuff. But when you're at that level, to your point about being able to compete without having the enhancements of the whatever the pharmaceutical was being used, you can't compete at the higher level. So now you have this tool that's in the academic world that's kind of giving you a similar advantage in a way, right? And it's a little harder to detect than being finding things in your bloodstream.
Hmm. And I mean, even that apparently is rather difficult. So,
I was gonna say it's we read about it, but I don't think that's as easy as easy said as done as well. We just hear about the results when somebody does get kind of hammered. So interesting, because I hadn't, to be honest, Michael. I'm looking at it from how like just being able to find out information, but this isn't kind of the higher level like bleeding edge type of thing that you're trying to find out and see something new. It's more kind of going back and trying to find out like dates when something happened or that you can add to whatever you're writing about. It's very useful for doing things. I come back to my daughter using it for to write a cover letter for a CV. And like to me, there's a great application, right? Like it's one of those things. It's a summary again. It's one of those summaries that puts it together. And part of me, this is coming back to the point. Um, do people read the cover letters, and do people really like putting together a cover letter? Because the CV is the thing, right? So I'm always intrigued, especially in possibly your world, that impact, and it's a lot more dramatic to me than you do see it in the layman world.
yeah, well, I think part of it too is you're not going to see the most substantial effects until people who have gone like through their whole education career with this tool, right, from start to finish. And so,
That's too early.
like
Yes.
you and me, we have done research, right? We know how to collect the information. It's just time intensive. But if someone's never done that, right, they've never learned those skills, then they're always reliant on the AI. But then,
No.
yeah, when you get to the bleeding edge, you need those skills.
Interesting.
So,
It's a real. It's like in talking with you, it's a real. This is a significant challenge that is going to have to be, like you said, it's already being dealt with, but on a day to day basis, right? And from a very young age.
yeah, well, and I mean, universities now are seeing high school students that have had AI through most of their,
Hmm. Yes.
secondary schooling. So it's
Interesting. That I was going to say, it's you've really broadened my thought on that now. Because I've been kind of saying, like, I'm quite liking the fact that I can save a bunch of time on doing these things. Noticing, of course, that there's things that you got to watch out, you got to look out for. But we've done it, as you said. We've done that work already. We know what we're looking for. If you don't know that, that's a scary thing.
yeah,
Do you?
well, and it's oh, sorry.
No,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's one of those biases that you don't necessarily pick up on. The people making the policy and the decisions when it comes to these tools are the ones that have done the work already,
Hmm.
right? Versus, students who are going to grow up with them, right? Similar to my generation, we grew up with the internet.
Yep.
Um, but we also saw right at the beginning what it's like without. And so we have a lot more context for, you know, internet education, most of us.
Hmm. No, to me, it's one of those things that, like, I kind of have to think a little bit more about. It's why it's good to have this conversation because it kind of opens up things that aren't not necessarily immediately seen, especially by the clickbait that's often pushed out about them, right? And it's a little bit more of a deeper dive into that because you see AI, it's very easy to say, and most of the time people are either yay or nay on it because we're that's kind of what we're forced into. And when you hear a lot of the nay part, I'm kind of saying, well, there's a lot of useful things that are there. But in those useful things, it's also like it's you get to know enough to be dangerous.
Well, and that's just it. Like it is a tool, and there are good applications for every tool, and there are bad applications for every tool. It's just that this tool is very versatile, and so it appears like it can be used in many areas where maybe it is not well suited, and so we're still
Finding that out.
in the process of figuring that out, right? Where does this tool fit? So,
And could be for a very long time, actually, when you kind of and to your point, as a business, of course, you're always looking at the bottom line to what can this do for me? Somebody comes in with a kind of a clever PowerPoint presentation, and a number of people have lost their jobs forgetting that, well, yeah, it does this, but often it's not giving us a style that we want or the thing. Somebody's going to have to do that work too, right? And it's often like, well, it's that temptation again, right? It's who's not going to jump at something that's going to save them a week of time that that they almost don't have to pay any attention to, right?
mm-hmm.
So interesting again. Do you think this um, will be a positive or negative for the idea of of faith and God? Because I've heard a bunch of negative on it recently, but I'm not seeing it. And that's like, and so I'll give you an example. Um, I tend to use, I've done ChatGPT a little bit, but I tend to go to Grok, believe it or not, on X. And I found it very helpful. So that negative is saying, well, it's helping me to understand these verses and giving me a lot of kind of background in order to chase down in other directions to check that further out. I'm not seeing the negative part of it. What do you see on that?
So I haven't really seen much of that myself either, and I think partially that's because when it comes to faith and religion, we tend to be a step behind in technology, like in the church. We tend to lag behind a little bit.
Hmm.
And so I think we'll probably start seeing it show up more. Um, but going back to what we were saying before, I think it's going to be similar in that it depends on where you stop, right? So if you ask Grok, like, what is the meaning of this verse? And you stop there, that's probably going to be negative. Or at least
Yes.
it has a high potential of being negative
Yes.
across the board. But if you use that as sort of a jumping off point, it's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. And then you go and look at, say, a biblical commentary or some
Right.
other sermon or teaching, and you use that just as sort of a launch point. That's fine, right? And finding information you're not familiar with, that's typically where AI shines. So if you
Hmm.
can use it that way, it's fine. But if you start relying on it for truth, right, that's where I think it becomes a bit shaky.
So when you say that, Michael, can you give like an idea of when you say of a truth that could be like just for from the warning standpoint, like um that maybe you've even experienced where you've gone and utilized it and it's come back to give you, and it doesn't have to be, it can be subtle, right? But in being subtle, very wrong.
Yeah, so the example I like to use is when Google launched Gemini in their own advertising materials. They showed, I think, as a father asking for some cool, facts about the James Webb Telescope, right? And so that's sort of related
Okay.
to my stuff. And so it came up with this list, and one of them was that it imaged the first exoplanet, right? And that seems very reasonable. And if you look
Sure.
at the details, like James Webb has imaged exoplanets, and it has done some first images of certain exoplanets, but it wasn't the first telescope to image an exoplanet, right? But there's enough
Okay.
facts around it
Yes.
that are similar enough
Yep.
that it presented that as truth, right? And
Yep.
it sort of mixed them up because it's statistical in nature. It's not truth driven.
Right. Right. Well, that's the part. when you say that, um, it's statistically driven. This is the part that I think is difficult for us to kind of comprehend
Yes, because we don't
because
think that way.
no, and it's like, why did it write it back like that? Well, it's not thinking. like, like everything that's there is based on data, not thought. And somebody created it as well, right? It didn't like I hear often, it didn't create itself outside of how the algorithm allows it to use the data that it's collected. And so that's why like I find it like um when I hear that sometimes it's like it's not thinking. Even though
Yeah,
it
where
says thinking when it's answering you.
well, and where it gets a bit confusing is that it can look like it's thinking
Oh
because
yeah.
all of its data was created by thinking people. And so
Mhm.
it exhibits many of the patterns that you see from a thinking person making data, right? As thinking
Interesting.
person has written this, and so it's copying patterns because it's not thinking itself. And as it starts mixing and blending patterns together, sometimes you get things that aren't true or don't
Yes.
make a lot of sense or it's a hallucination or something, right?
And you've used that term already, is the hallucination part of it. Like where did that actually come from? So
Yeah,
interesting.
well, you can sort of think of these models like having many, many pathways, right? And so changing how you start your journey can change which pathways you end up on. And the longer you're using the model in a conversation, right, the chances that you get on the wrong pathway go up basically. And
Right.
so that's where the hallucinations start, where something was similar enough at the beginning that it did okay, but as time goes on, there's too many variables, right? And
Yes.
that opens up more things for the network to potentially land on. So,
So one of the experiments I've not tried, but you've made me think that I want to try this, is to ask the same question multiple times.
and potentially just changing how you word it slightly too. That's something I've played around with because
Say that again, pardon me.
so if you ask the same question, but you word it a bit differently every time, it's interesting because you can sometimes get very different answers depending on how you've asked the question.
Interesting. Because like that, one of the things that I do wonder about is I might get a different answer if I did that. Or not might. I would definitely get a different answer. Because it's not, I don't think it looks back at what it's answering. It's kind of putting together that information when at the instant that the question is asked, right? Like,
So it does have a history, but because it's a computer algorithm, the history has a size,
oh,
right?
okay,
And
okay,
so as the conversation goes on, like if you're talking like a chat GPT conversation, you're
right.
asking it multiple things, eventually that fills up and it has to start dropping things, right? Because it can only hold on to so much data. And the network has
Interesting.
to sort of be designed around that size of data.
Huh.
So there are computational limits on that, right?
Today.
Today. Well, and it doesn't scale linearly, right? So
Okay,
if you increase the, I think it's the context size just a little bit, right? That affects the network size. Like the actual network has to grow to accommodate it, as far as
right.
I understand.
Okay.
And so if you're trying to process, millions of tokens constantly from all the different queries, that potentially requires, twice the capacity you had before, right? Something like that. I'm sort
Hence,
of making numbers up there, but like it scales very poorly.
well, it's not linear. Like that's what you just said. Like that's
Hmm.
that, and that
Yeah.
now makes sense to me. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And
There's so
if you
many.
follow like PC hardware space, that's why memory prices are shooting up because they need more memory to have more models be bigger and do more things, right? And accommodate more people. It's very memory intensive. And there just isn't
Interesting.
enough because no one anticipated the demand going up like this.
And to your point, that would be very difficult to anticipate because it would vary to such an extent, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you follow semiconductors, like the process of designing and then, taping out the design and actually producing it and getting all the production capacity, like that's potentially a decade in planning, right?
Wow. I don't follow the semiconductor world today at all. I like it. So, Michael, to give you an idea, our first computer had a 40 megabyte hard drive. Like, that's probably almost unbelievable to you.
I think it was a 60 megabyte hard drive. One of my hobbies was building and fixing old computers, and
Oh,
it was
cool.
like a massive brick of a hard drive, and yeah, 16 megabytes. So
I like
yeah,
it's
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 interesting seeing where we started.
because it's I wonder, like, is this one of these things that there's no end to how much it, like, to where it can go? Like, are we in that semiconductor world? Is it only limited by what we figured out, and our minds can be creative enough to build? Like, is that what its limit is?
Hard to say. I mean, part of the challenge with semiconductors, like there's a physics side of it, which is sort of
Yes.
why I was interested, but there's an engineering side of it too, right? And the processes you use to make transistors smaller and smaller, right, to get more and more memory in the same volume of, data
Yes. Right.
center. It boggles my mind. Um, I think some of those like ultraviolet lithography machines are like vaporizing droplets of lead to make the x-rays and get them the right way, and like it's wild.
Oh my
So
gosh. Well, that's what I mean.
um
Like, it's limited only by our ability to find technology that can take it there. Like, it's not like a car has to be this big because we are this big. Like, I remember years and years ago, I used to compare the computer industry with the car industry and how poorly the advancing technology of the car did. They're not. It's not even a correct comparison, but it made you kind of get an idea of what it was. They're two completely different physicalities, though, and it's like now with what you're describing, it's it's phenomenal, like where it could go. And now with AI, like that could to what you like. I haven't thought of this before. This is why this is so fascinating to me. Like when you think of just what you could go and how deep you could go into questions with AI, that who knows what kind of memory you would require to keep answering those questions. And that's only one individual. Like it's almost an infinite capacity required. Like in some
yeah,
cases,
well,
right?
and it shows, I don't know if it's infinite,
Okay.
because that gets into a lot of computer theory that
Mm.
I'm not quite familiar with. um I do believe that, yeah, it might be infinite. I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to think about that one a bit more. But what was I going to say? Oh, I've lost my train of thought now.
Well,
What was your question?
I'll go back to the infinite word because we had previously talked about this sentience of AI. And I highly question it because I think, and this is not coming from a high level scientist, this is coming from me who has probably enough science to be dangerous, but it was a big part of my life, obviously. But in the sense that, and this is where I go to the subatomic world as well as the cosmic world, but um, I think we struggle with infinity. I don't think we can understand it. And I think the subatomic level has it. I think the the creation of life has it. The creation of cells, atoms, they all have it. And so when I said infinite to you, that's why I don't think it can ever be sentient because we can't deal with infinity. And life to me is that This is why it's fun to have this conversation with you, because it's like, I'm not sure I'm jogging your memory on what what you were going to say, but when we think of us as, when before we're alive, um, there's the earth, all the pieces to it. Moment we're conceived, there's something that happens that brings all the materials that come out of the earth to make us, and it grows that into the human that we were born. We come out of the womb, we grow up to the level that we die, and then it all goes back to. And that thing that makes that, I was just talking about this. We still have no idea what that is. Like how, like it's infinite in sense, and that's why I say the sentience part. Um, I guess it's a lovely science fiction thing to think about, but I think the ability to do it is incomprehensible.
Yeah, so this actually did jog my memory. It's sort of the same
Good.
lines. I was just going to comment that, you know, it gives me an appreciation for our own brains and our own minds
Mm,
with how much we're able to keep track of,
mm,
right? Because I can use context and memory from decades ago when I was a kid to inform my decisions now. But with AI, that's not quite as simple. Like you can train it on things that have happened in the past, but it's not recalling them like it does during, you know, a chat with GPT or chat GPT, like in a conversation
hmm,
dialogue.
hmm.
Um, but humans can.
Yes.
And it's a very, you know, even if you just want to look at our brains as computers, like it's a very different kind of computer, and it's quite phenomenal.
It does come. You know what this reminds me of? The last conversation about Sir Roger Penrose's Three Worlds,
Mhm.
and him saying about there's still another part that we haven't yet discovered. And kind of we were talking around the unconscious part, because this is the part, to me, you're like right on this now, because it's like we go to sleep for a third of our lives that we can't control. Some will say, and I've had conversations around this, that I can control lucid dreaming, but by and large, the go to sleep is out of our control. Like like we have to do it because we can't survive without sleep. And where that is like we know so little about it, but we all do it, and it's required, and it's a part of our, like a third of our lives capacity goes on. And I find, again, coming back to this whole idea of the AI being able to do that, um, we're only looking at the almost the data part of it, like our comprehension of data in our brain, and our brain doesn't, I don't think, does it in the sense of how the computer does.
No, and I mean with AI, its superpower is the amount of data it can process, right?
Far
Because you can
beyond
feed
us.
right, and so that's where it excels. Um, but to go back to your point about infinities,
Hmm.
you know, I kind of like that because you know in physics we deal with infinities quite frequently, but they're always in the abstract, right?
Hmm.
The infinities aren't physical,
Hmm.
right? They're very much in that world of the abstract,
Hmm.
the mathematical world, if you were to put it in terms of Penrose's
Hmm.
three worlds.
Right.
And that isn't really something AI has access to, right? It has access to the information we've generated about it, but
Hmm.
it itself doesn't have access to those abstract concepts that are not part of the physical world
Well, I mean, to your point, I think the only way that it can understand it is in the data part, that it's
that we've
told
created.
by us.
Yeah.
Like how, and that's, to me, it stays with me like regularly when I kind of go through this, because I find it just profound that, and we just kind of skip over it. Like, yeah, it's just affinity. But
Well, I
yet,
think because we live with it,
yes.
right? And it's
Hmm.
just part of our existence. And so it's very difficult to recognize that as something special.
But it, but it's so ubiquitous in our existence, right? Like that's the part that's so astounding to me often is like, how does that, like, that's why I keep saying, I keep coming back to, and I'm getting very succinct about it. There is only one answer for all this. Like, because it doesn't compute for me any other way. I love the thought thinking and how that comes together and how we produce these ideas. But it's like, then it comes back to this whole, well, that's why the Hebrews 11:3 impacted me, because 2,000 years ago they wrote that what we see is made of things that aren't visible. Like how did they even know how to say that?
Yeah, no, it's very profound. And, our own minds are something that isn't visible,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And so there being so much consistency in the universe with minds, right? Whether it's abstract mathematics and infinities or, being able to access the world and make sense of it internally. Like
right.
it's just, yeah.
No, to me it's just, I'm endlessly fascinated by it. And that's why I was so intrigued by Penrose's comment was, will there be something else that helps us to understand that unconscious, so to speak, that untouchable part, that what I heard somebody say, we know how to turn it on and turn it off. So an anesthetologist and a neurosurgeon or something, they were saying, we know how to turn it on and we know how to turn it off. That's the unconscious. But other than that, we know not very much about it. But it
No,
doesn't seem to bother us.
well, I mean, I think it bothers some people,
Oh yes, for
but
sure, sure. Yeah.
yeah, philosophers have been sort of mulling that one over for quite some time. But
Oh, for forever, right? It's just like I find it so insane, and that's to me why the spiritual part of this is in many ways, to me there's a connection there. So I'll give another example here that it recently came out. So I had a recent Remembrance Day episode, and I have an uncle who did a lot of Remembrance Day memorial things through the government around the world. So he had an experience with a lot of different, shall we say, traditions. And he described the indigenous tradition of, he called it repatriating a body, like often would try to bring the body back to the country. That's a big part of the military. And he said that he found there's an indigenous ritual where they go with instruments, a bundle. Maybe you've heard of this. I'd never heard of this before, but and they go and they have this ceremony where they bring the spirit back, not the body. And I was kind of amazed by it because it felt like it was kind of talking, like, in a way, the Christian idea of a spirit versus like being so concerned about the body coming back, but the spirit's no longer in the body, right? Like we were just talking about, whatever that thing is that makes us who we are is gone. What comes back, what's existing of us, um, the cadaver, I guess you'd say, just it goes back to the earth, to what it was, to where it came from, so to speak. And so I thought, how interesting that gets connected with, um, like the spirit, for instance, that like Jesus talks about, right? In much of the world. So I kind of, this is where I kind of come back and forth between the science, and because I think it's kind of interesting how there's things that are there that we almost seem to want to ignore in order for us to get our solution in a material sense of how it exists or how it happened. And then, but hearing the indigenous ritual, I'm probably going to get some comments on this now, having said I got it wrong. But it fascinated me, Michael, on, like, it almost seemed like that would be something that we would do in a Christian world. Do you follow what I mean by that?
Yeah, well, and I mean, this is not my area. I'm not really qualified to speak
I'm
on
not
some
really
of these
looking for you,
things.
the expert, but I'm thinking of the science and the faith part, and like seeing the crossover between them. That's what I'm really asking.
Sure. Yeah. I just as a scientist, I always try and preface when I'm outside of my area. It's just sort of reflex at this point. But
Cool.
um, I think it is interesting though that the way we look at the physical world and say non-physical in Christianity is very interesting. Um, I mean, the way you framed it too, there's modern Christianity has a lot of Greek influence where we treat like the spirit and the body as very separate things. But my understanding is that the Israelites saw it more as one thing, right? And vaguely remember, I think the word for spirit is connected to breath,
Okay.
right?
Yes, yes, yes. Because he put the breath
Well,
into our
right.
lungs,
Well,
right? That was Genesis.
yeah. Well, and it's something you don't see, but you see the effect of, right? And so there's
Yes,
a
I like
symbolic
that.
part of it there.
Yep.
Um, I don't remember where I was going with this, but the point I wanted to make was that, I find it interesting that our bodies aren't all we are, but they might be a reflection or a manifestation of something else, right? And so the spirit and the body may not exist separately, but there is something more. And I don't know exactly how to best define that within a Christian perspective, um, but I find it really interesting that something as simple as this, like, can change the way you look at humans, right? And we aren't just computers. We aren't just
No.
information. We're something more. And what we see is a reflection of that something more, even if we can't quite define it.
Hmm. Agreed. Well, it's one of those things that I like. How do I say this? So for me, one of the challenges with our Christian world is faith. So I'm bouncing all over here, Michael, but it's kind of fun to do.
Yeah,
So
I like it.
when I look at faith, and I'll go back, for example, to this the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, where he talks about you can't serve two masters. Um, and then so this, I think that's 624, and I think 633 says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." And the reason why I kind of bring this up is because um, we're in a material world, and it's very difficult for us to understand how that faith can God's going to have your back. Like, what you hold your faith in Him, and all things will you will have all things, so to speak. Not that you know what they are. They're in God's plan. And trying to put that together with how these things fit with, um, I'm going to say, the spirit and what we are, kind of cross over to me. And that's the part that I think is, I'm having a hard time finding the words to describe what I'm trying to say, because it's like the spirit is inseparable for us, it seems, why we're alive, like why we're in this existence. And the only time it seems to potentially leave us is when we are in the unconscious. But it still runs all our body functions that we're not really aware of doing. So now how do we cross those things over into this this sense of faith in what we're doing. I think I'm running out of line here of where I'm trying to go with this, because it's kind of trying to match that material part of our world with the spiritual part that I'll say the New Testament really spends a lot of time telling us about. And I think you kind of touched about that when you were saying about the Greek understanding. And so, how does that, and we spend so much of our time now in that material sense, it's very difficult to see the other side or to even understand. In fact, I think they had a better understanding 2,000 years ago because they didn't have all the material part that we have today. So they were more in touch with that spiritual, that unconscious part that we don't have. So I'm trying to figure out what the question was that I'm trying to ask you there, but it kind of gets mixed into what you were saying about that. How is the unconscious part of this existence that we can't seem to touch? We can
Yeah.
experience it in some format, but we can't seem to touch. And
So, yeah, I don't know if I have a solid answer to this. Um, I will say that I probably try and make a distinction when it comes to faith
mhm,
between sort of that blind faith, and that's really easy to jump to when we're talking
mhm,
about things we can't see.
yes,
And I mean, it's sort of cliche, but I do like to frame it as trust, right? Trust that there is something there that we can't
yes,
see.
yeah,
And so, going to your point, I think the trust is really important when, we're trying to make sense of the world, especially if there's things that we don't always have access to, right? And
mhm,
that could be as simple as trusting that tomorrow is going to happen, right? I have no access to tomorrow, right? I can't observe it. I can't
yes,
test it
yep,
until it happens. But I have trust it's going to happen, right? And I mean,
yep,
some of that's informed by experience, but it, I don't think faith in general can't be informed by experience, right? And Christianity is very experience driven,
mhm.
right? And so I don't know if this is answering your question, but
Well, it's coming close, Mike, because I'm thinking when I say that about faith, what I was trying to say is we have that faith, but it doesn't stop our inquiry. Like, if anything, and I know this is weird, but I am more curious about it today than I can remember in my life. Like, I like scripture, I was just having this conversation yesterday. I can't seem to get enough of trying to kind of understand what that's directing to. And that's why I was excited about our conversation today, because it helps to ground that in the sense of, so where will it go? Where will AI take us? Where will science take us? It's not going to stop. Like, we're just learning more. Where will the computer, like, we've got this tool today that does seem to be unstoppable in the sense of what we may be able to get from it. And yet we come back and we need to have faith. That's why I was using the Sermon on the Mount, because it's um, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. That's a big part of faith. But yet we have a hard time with that. like, like I have faith, but why is this happening to me, as an example, right? And you said you did get it, because you said, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Like, in fact, if we were to look at um like even this conversation today, I didn't really have any idea what we were going to necessarily talk about. If I couldn't come back and say I did want to know about more about quantum gravity, but I didn't know how that was going to come about. And if I look at, like, you get up at 6:30 in the morning or 5 o'clock, whatever time you get up, you're by and large you get up because the alarm got you up. But what you did after that, you have roughly in your head what's going to happen, but you don't know that, well, the whatever happens, right? The water didn't come in the shower, or the coffee maker broke, or the refrigerator's leaking. Oh, like there's so much in our life that we just don't know. But yeah, we go on figuring we've got it all figured out. Do you follow what I mean? Like that? And that's what I mean when you said yes tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we kind of know the sun's going to come up. We know there's going to be light, and I'm going to do something. But we have it
Yeah,
so intact that we think we know what we're going to do.
yeah. Well, and I mean, it's hard to operate if we can't plan as humans, right?
You
It's very
have to
much part of
plan.
our
Yes,
experience.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not
Um,
suggesting you go without a plan. I'm just saying I just find it amazing how we get so attached to how we think things go, and yet they don't go like that by and large at all. Many times they get the large picture. We end up going to work, as an example, or we're going to school. We end up at the school, but we don't know what we're going to see on our way to school or to work. There's so much in our world that seems beyond us. And yet we kind of, and I think this comes back to the infinite thing. We don't think about infinity because we can get by without thinking about infinity quite easily. I was going to say, when I was talking about this, is how, as far as how much we have this sense that we're in control, I think was where I was going to, right? And this is where, to me, faith has helped me a big part, Michael, because it started to recognize that I'm not a little bit farther. And it's like, this kind of comes back a little bit to our last discussion around free will. And you said something that I thought was very important, is to do science at any level, you have to have free will. And I think subsequent to that time, it was an important part of putting my kind of connection together, because um, I was starting to get to the point of we have both. And I don't know whether it's the right question to ask whether we have free will or not, because we really like that question, because we like to feel we're in control, right? But what happens if we have free will, and yet God is in control of everything? That breaks our logical brain. It doesn't work for our logical brain. But what happens if that is what it is? Like, what happens if we do have both? Now, we're never going to be able to demonstrate it. I don't think. I don't think there's something that's that but it's the question, and that's where I said about, like, when we were talking about faith becomes important in the sense that um, we know tomorrow's going to happen. You said that, and without that, that brings us a hopelessness that is almost impossible for us as a human to survive on.
I was going to say faith is like hand in hand with the concept of hope, right? Right. And it's not just about belief in something we can't see, but wanting something we can't see, right? And having a desire for, a better tomorrow. Or with AI, right? We're marching forward, but probably most people aren't, hoping it turns into a Skynet and destroys the world, right? They're hoping for a better future, whatever that
Yes.
looks like,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so having faith and hoping are, very closely related.
Well, to me, it's one of those things that keeps returning to me to give that settling, to say I don't want to stop. This is why, to me, this is one of the things that drives this particular podcast, in is because um, it's like shifting perspectives, thought-provoking ideas, and we start to become aware that nothing is what it seems. And it's staggering how often that starts to take place, right? In whatever fashion, face would look at in life. And when you were talking about, that's why I smile about, to me, much of the Bible, if not the whole thing, is about believing in something you can't see. Like, that's the whole. It's an upside down world. Whereas from, like, being a young child, parents warn us about, if you don't see it, don't believe it, right? Like that's just one of those things. And in many ways, I think even post Darwin's The Origin of Species, I think science took that on to a large extent, right? Like if you can't see it, how are we going to ever do anything with it? And now I'm wondering, like, are we progressing in that direction to be able to do more with what we can't see?
Yeah, well, at least in terms of physics, like theoretical physics is very much comfortable with that, right?
Exactly.
And there are questions like in quantum mechanics, what features or what objects in the mathematical model represent reality, like I was saying before. Um, but we trust that those things are accurate predictions, right? And
Uh-huh.
we use them and we believe in them in that sense, even if they're not some physical feature of reality. And
Right.
so, yeah, there's that trust, faith, hope in applying those things because yeah, they aren't tangible.
And Michael, you might have just answered like why that the question I was asking of um why do we continue to have this curiosity to pursue it? Like like Philippians 4:7, I think the peace of God surpasses all understanding. I can remember the day I heard that about 4 years ago. It was like a bright light kind of went on in my brain. They're telling us right there. But you would think that that would make us hopeless. Like, do you follow me? The peace of God surpasses all. We're never going to understand the peace of God. That phrase is and this is going back to your other comment about being careful how you take scripture. But on first look, it surpasses all understanding. Well, that's kind of telling us that you're never really going to understand it. I'm okay with that, but it's not stopping me from pursuing these other curiosities that go alongside that. Do I think I'm ever going to understand how the cosmos works? No, but it doesn't stop me being fascinated that you have this, well, I'll use the word infinite universe that we're in that all fits together.
Well, there's a trust and a hope that there is something to know, right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, curiosity, right, doesn't exist. Right? Curiosity is very much grounded on that hope of
Yes.
finding something to know.
Simple. It's that simple.
Yeah, I
I
mean, in
like that.
practice, it gets very complicated, but yeah,
So I'm going to take us out of this I'll say rabbit hole that's kind of become like a wormhole almost.
tends to happen.
I don't think I asked you this the last time, but you're probably a big reader. Um, what when you started to read, can you remember like what you read as a young, like a child, even like a teen? Like, what were some of your favorite books to read? I'm guessing that you're a reader, though, Michael. I got to be careful here. I'm making a bit of an assumption because maybe you weren't.
No, I definitely was. I started with things like The Hobbit and
Oh, you
Chronicles of
did.
Narnia. I liked fantasy because, imagination, I think, plays a big part in where I ended up,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
right?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I also enjoyed science fiction, right? So I read Isaac Asimov's like Foundation trilogy and
Oh, okay.
or on a lighter note like Adam Douglas's
Oh,
yeah,
Hitchhiker to the. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And because I mean that's also just very silly imaginings of the world. And so it was stuff like that where yeah, I enjoyed things that made me think.
One of the things I remember from Douglas Adams was him saying, I think it was the car was so black you could see infinity in it. And I always thought that concept was pretty cool. So what are you reading these days?
Um I've taken a bit of a break
Oh,
because
okay.
coming
Yeah.
out of grad school, it's all
Oh my
reading,
goodness.
yeah, and it's very much high level academic papers and stuff like that. And so once I finished, it was sort of like I didn't want to necessarily pick up a book and go through it, but
Right.
um, yeah, I mean, I still do a bit. Like you get to a certain level of academia, like you just don't stop, right? I've
Right.
just sort of
Right.
dialed it down. So I've been reading about quantum computing, which is an area I didn't know a whole lot about.
Oh, okay.
Going through some of that. Um, I don't know if
So
I'm doing a lot of like casual reading.
so is there a book that you read again outside of the Bible that helped connect science and faith, God, um, like uh, I'll even stretch it to religion that impacted you, like outside of, I'll say, Narnia, that like kind of right, like I'm thinking of something like have you read Stephen C. Meyer? Do you know that name?
Yeah, it's
He
been a
wrote
while.
he wrote Darwin's Doubt. That was the one that I got introduced to him on. But do you have any books like that um, that impacted you that you can think of?
I mean, this probably isn't a very interesting answer, but it was probably Mere Christianity from C.S. Lewis.
Really? I okay.
And
Uh,
just because he very much moved past a lot of like the dogma side of Christian belief and like boiled it down to just its very essence and then showed how that applies and sort of set up this very succinct worldview, right? And it was very easy to understand. And
mm,
that's not a exercise I had really done before.
okay.
And so I think that's why it impacted me so much.
That's a pretty big book for a lot of people. Like I hear that. Have you read any of other C.S. Lewis's work?
I've read his science fiction books.
Oh, you
There's a
did the
there's a
trilogy?
trilogy. Yeah,
Ah, okay. I've seen that around, but I've never read it. Did you like it?
I did. It's a bit different because it
I can
it
imagine it's got to be
it
different.
yeah, it's interesting. I definitely recommend it.
You do, eh? Okay.
Yeah, no,
Did you read that as a young man, or well, you're
that was
still a
later
very
on.
young man, but is it okay? Interesting.
Yeah,
No, I've seen it around. But I don't hear about it a lot, but I've heard a few people tell me about that book. So I've read Screw Tape Letters. That was the one that really impacted me. Um, and it became one of my favorite books. Like I was kind of surprised by doing that. Surprisingly, I have not read Mere Christianity. It is a book on my shelf, but I haven't. I don't know. For me, I've kind of gotten to a point with C.S. Lewis. It's very difficult for me to read him. Or I shouldn't say difficult. It's a challenge to read him because it's not like he he has a way of writing that I'll call is in a way biblical. Like he puts a lot in every sentence, and it's not like just sitting down and reading a book through for me. And so I'm quite intimidated by Mere Christianity.
I feel that way about Chesterton.
Oh, okay, okay, yes, that.
He can be a very dense read at times.
Ah, okay. Have you read much of Chesterton's work?
I'm currently going through his three apologies.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
so it's a lot, and I'm sort of taking it a little bit at a time because
Because
yeah,
that was one of Lewis's, like, I think, hers, right?
yeah, yeah. As far as I understand,
No, that's a kind of a cool thing. So so you're taking a break from doing too much reading, but if you're doing Chesterton,
maybe that's
that's
why
that's a
it's
bit of a
very
challenge.
concentrated reading. So
Oh my goodness, man. So what's next in the world for Michael? Like what's in your mind of things that are ahead for you and what you kind of alluded a little bit to, you're working in the data world right now, hence a lot of the AI questioning. But what do you see as like what are things that are intriguing you these days? You mentioned quantum computers, and I did really want to ask you a few questions on that after we answer this question. But what do you see kind of happening? Because you like it's not everybody I talk to that has a deep interest in science working in that field and is very connected with the Christian God Jesus world.
I'm not entirely sure at this point. Other
Ah,
than I
okay.
want to continue research, right? I know that much. Um, but being able to sort of land somewhere can be a bit tricky in academia. And so you
Mm-hmm.
don't always have a choice. And so, as long as I'm doing research, I think I'll be quite
Where you
happy.
want. Yeah.
Yeah. And it'll probably be related to quantum gravity or something along those lines. But
So in reading about quantum computing, can you give me kind of an idea of what that world is? I hear it a lot, and I hear it's very fast, but um, I don't really know a lot about what interested you in that world, other than you're already you built computers in your younger years, and you're fascinated by that computer world.
yeah, so in my undergrad, I did computer science and physics together.
Oh
And so
man.
this is basically like computer science and physics together. It's quite literally what it is. And so it's a very different way of looking at things like information theory, which is what computer science is built on.
Mm.
Um, but it has some, really intriguing properties because, you know, instead of bits, you have qubits, and qubits can be in superposition. And so you can have values anywhere from 0 to 1. And so there's a lot of potential of like storing a lot of data because you're
Okay.
not limited to just, binary. You can have mixtures of the two. And then you start mixing that with the quantum mechanics, and if you have a good algorithm for applying to a problem, like you get answers almost immediately because it's more like taking a measurement than it
Mm.
is the traditional counting problem. So I always liken it to like weighing something. So, like, if you had a pile of rice and you wanted to know how many grains of rice you had, the
Oh, okay.
traditional computer would start counting, right? And the ways
Yes.
you would speed that up is you make it count faster or you give it the ability to count more than one at a time,
Okay.
right? And with a quantum computer, it's basically like pulling out the weigh scale, measuring one grain and then measuring the whole pile and then just dividing the weight by the two and immediately arriving at your answer,
That's an interesting picture you're forming here,
right?
and
So
that's
you've
kind of what quantum computing is like.
Yeah, it's a sense of it at least. And so you're
Okay.
turning a counting problem or an adding problem, I guess technically,
Yes.
into a measurement problem. And you're creating a physical analog. But then you have the quantum mechanics, and that's where it gets a little more complicated.
So that linearity of a like counting computer goes away in this sense, right?
Yeah.
You don't have that limitation anymore, obviously. So could this go hand in hand with the idea of the um, growing requirement for data in the AI world?
Potentially. The difficulty there is you need to build bigger quantum computers,
Ah,
and
okay.
scaling up quantum computers is very difficult because quantum mechanics happens everywhere. And so quantum mechanics is happening around the quantum computer and the qubits and
Oh,
potentially
right.
influencing them. And so when you go and measure, you're not necessarily measuring just what you wanted to, right? And going back to that analogy, right, you might not have just rice, you might have some dust or, whatever other byproducts in there that throw off the
The
measurements,
weight.
or, they're not
Okay.
all identical, right? And so there's
Interesting.
physical things that get in the way.
that is a whole different way of looking at the problem. I hadn't haven't heard that as a way of explaining it. That's very intriguing. I got to think about that a little more.
And I
Wow.
mean, it just sort of gives a hint because
Yeah.
like anything, as you get into the details, it gets more complicated, right? And there is a logic that you can apply like a similar computer, but it becomes a quantum logic. And, but it is very much turning the counting or the summing problem into a measurement
So
problem.
I'm going to throw this a little bit kind of sideways here. And I'm going to go back to, I'm going to stay with this concept of weighing versus counting. I'm going back to Egypt and the pyramids. And the question of how they built the pyramids. And the reason why I'm raising this is because there's a lot of physical ways that they have given us theories of how they moved that massive number of gigantic stone into the virtually perfect formation of the pyramid. And there's lots of books written in it, much of it that can be go from legend to mythology. There's all kind of stuff. But when you talk about this, and so then we've gone through, I think it's like 2,500 years. I think that's the estimate of when the pyramids, I'm talking about the Egyptian pyramids in this case. And we went through, I just recently kind of learned about the Dark Ages, and a lot of stuff was lost as far as knowledge go during that period, be it, I don't know how long we would take it from like a 500 to 1400 or something like that. Um, when you talk about quantum computing and you go from the counting to the measuring, is there something there that like could have been known that would allow um, people, humans, to use something that we've lost? And that's why I'm asking this question, because it's like I've heard the 10,000 slaves and moving the rocks. There's a lot of different floating them, whatever it is, to get the pyramids where they are, but they're incredibly precisely positioned. Just my first place I want to go to that I haven't gone to on my bucket list, Egypt is one of the places just so I can get a sense of the enormity of it. But um, do you think that there's something that we may be advancing towards, and that's why I'm going to the quantum computing, that could help us in understanding what technology they may have had then that has been lost?
I don't know. Um, my sort of first response, without thinking on it much deeper, would be no.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's only because with quantum computers, you need an algorithm. And if you have an algorithm, you typically know what the problem is. And when it comes to unknowns, you don't necessarily have a well defined problem.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay.
So, yeah. Um,
You're so good at grounding.
but for pyramids, we have worked out certain things. I know that much, right? And so leveling off the bedrock, you could have used like grooves in the rock, and then they fill it with water, and wherever the water
Hmm.
settles is level, right? And that's just
Right. Right.
applying gravity,
Yes. Yep.
things like that. There was a paper that I think came out last year or maybe the year before. They were looking at Djoser's pyramid at Saqqara. It's the step pyramid. It was the first one in the Old Kingdom. But they thought the Egyptians might have actually used water to bring the blocks up from the center, because there's this huge tunnel network underneath the pyramid, and there's signs that they actually redirected one of the um, branches of the Nile. And they might have actually been able to use some sort of hydraulic lift and then sort of built the pyramid out that way. I don't know if that has any credibility. I'm not sure if the paper went through peer review. right? So take that with a
Okay.
grain of salt. But it was
Yes,
an
yes.
interesting idea, right? So I think for those kinds of things, it requires more of a requires people to reproduce them, right, and actually be on the
Mm,
ground and sort of more tangible science and archaeology. Um,
interesting. Because that would definitely take it into a more physical realm to me. That then because what when you said it's not a counting, but a measuring, and trying to figure out how put that when you when you say moving it with because water is incredibly powerful, and we don't understand water super great either. But how you could use it to do that, that'd be an interesting paper to read, actually. Intriguing. I hadn't heard that before at all. Because it's funny when we first moved out here to Abbotsford from Ontario. It was the beginning of the pandemic, and that's how we found, I'll say, Apologetics Canada. Well, we found Apologetics Canada before that because our daughter was taught by Andy at Pacific Light Bible College, so we got to acquainted, let's say, with Andy Steiger, and um, in doing so, I went to Northview Church to um, I'll call it a course they called Questioning Christianity. I wasn't so much questioning it. I was just interested in trying to learn more. At this point in time, I'm at that kind of beginning of getting more deep into some of Bible studies and things like that. And one of the things that I kind of got right away was the fact that the pyramids are not mentioned in the Bible. And I was kind of surprised by that in the sense that so much starts in Egypt of the Bible, right? And so I spent quite a bit of time going through it. I wrote a little bit about it too because I found it kind of strange. And do you know Graham Nickel?
that
You may
sounds
not.
familiar.
Graham actually did the course with Andy, the Questioning Christianity. They kind of co-hosted it. And Graham led me into Josephus's work, the historian at that time. And he had mentioned pyramids in his work, but it was more around, I think they were older. It wasn't like, because there's a theory that the Israelites helped build the pyramids, right? Like there's that concept they were the slaves that put it, but it's 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 really not accurate, I don't think, like because it just
No,
wasn't how it happened.
and I think most evidence is slaves weren't involved.
No. And so that was one of the first questions I had for them, that there wasn't a good answer. Like there's like, yeah, they were far away, but they did move around and stuff. I ended up with it's not really part of the narrative of the Bible at all, right? It's not um like talking God doesn't talk at all about the pyramids or anything, the formation of them. In fact, anything, it's more about getting the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, right? Like that's the whole story. But that's kind of where the pyramid started for me, and the connection with the Bible is I actually asked um, AI the question, and I guess I was kind of happy that they came back with the same question, same point. It's not part of the narrative of the Bible, so just one of those things that were interesting. But when you touched on the quantum computing concept, I wonder whether that was thinking that maybe was there another way that was kind of enabled, because I've heard acoustics and things like that to be able to move things, but they haven't really been able to demonstrate them very well. And was there another, like, they Egyptians were great magicians or could do kind of things? Or I've read about this. I'm not saying that it's necessarily accurate, but I thought, well, I'm gonna ask you that question anyway.
Yeah, well, and from what I understand, like Egyptian society was structured quite a bit differently.
Mm,
And so they had this massive farming community. But because of how the Nile behaves, right, it inundates on a cycle. There's several months where they don't have anything to do. And so the Egyptians would bring them all into these construction projects, right? They'd feed them and, give them beer or whatever. And they're fully supported during this time. And then, they were used for constructing things. And so they had this massive labor force that they could use on this cycle. And in the interim, that's when their craftsmen were, chopping up the blocks and transporting things. And because you have this big waterway through the whole country, it's easy to transport limestone, from one end to the other.
Interesting. Well, you've added another few pieces to the puzzle there, Michael, which I hadn't heard before. I am interested to know a little bit more about this pyramid that you were talking about. Where'd you say it was? Luxor? No,
Saqqara, I
Saqqara.
believe.
Because they did recently a program on some discoveries at Saqqara too that I thought I had seen.
Yeah, there's a lot of active digs there because there's lots of tombs. It's sort of a necropolis of sorts.
Okay.
Something.
Okay.
So there's multiple pyramids there, and that's where the bent pyramid is. There's also the red pyramid, or is it the black pyramid? Is also there, I think, and that's a much later addition. But yeah, like there's lots of stuff there, archaeologically.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
You see, our conversation's kind of going down
it's all over the place. Yeah. Started with quantum gravity, now it's Egypt.
When you say that, it's like you're talking about Egypt. I'm always kind of amazed that we've never gone into the ground further. Like we do a lot of space stuff, shooting rockets off into the world. I'm not necessarily thinking we're ever going to get to Mars, but and there's nothing to me in scripture that shows we have to leave the planet. Like there's nothing there that's saying we're going to find more in leaving the planet. But we haven't gone very far into the earth either. And this is another thing that kind of one of those that kind of goes to question is like, why haven't we done that? Like, why haven't we gone deeper into, like, most of our archaeology is quite surface compared to the depth of the earth. And I mean, there's been a couple of real big drillings. I think there's one in Russia that went down 41,000 feet, and they still found stuff down there, but we didn't have our technology for drilling won't allow us to go any farther. And to what extent, right? It's not as exciting as shooting big rockets into the sky and giving us more of that. So, and that came out of my pursuit when I come out of Egypt, asking about, well, is there more understanding that we would find from our history digging into the ground? But it's also getting a long way away from your physics and especially astrophysics and going out into the cosmos. But I was going to say it's been another fascinating conversation, Michael. I've had a lot of fun here today, and I'm also looking at we're here again. We're at 2 hours. You were right.
Yeah, that was pretty much spot on.
Listen, is there anything that we haven't said today that you'd like to kind of maybe even wrap up with today, like just of different things thoughts that you have, and you've done a lot, in the science and connecting, I'll say, the God world with that, and working with apologetics even, and helping to explain, bringing those connections together. Anything that you'd like to kind of wrap up with that kind of fits into I know a question I was going to ask you and I didn't ask you is, you're not working on a book or anything like that by any chance?
I'm sort of, yes, short answer, but I don't quite know where it's going to go yet.
Oh, wow.
Just some musings at this point, but very much, similar to what we've talked about, mostly minus the Egypt stuff.
No, it's like, to me, it's like it's an interesting place to kind of go down to, and it seems that I would like to read that book.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to just your finishing, your final sort of thoughts is, for me, I think it's really important just to remember the human connection in everything. Whether
Mm.
it's the science, whether it's the apologetics, the philosophy, the AI, the Egypt, whatever, you know, it's very much, it's the humanity that sort of
Oh
connects
yeah.
it all. And I think that's something that's often lost.
Well, to me, when you say that, it's kind of neat because even though we're not face to face in a coffee shop having a conversation, it's a humanity part that's going on here. Technology has enabled us to be able to do this. And I think it's kind of cool to be able to, without an agenda, have a discussion on many subjects that we think about. And so I thank you a lot for like participating, being part of the Better Than Not world, because I think it's better to do this to me than not. I just like I didn't know that always. I didn't realize how important conversation is and how important connecting with different people are. So it's like and like I said, I love having you on because you can bring such a grounding sense of science to it, which without using it as quote quote a god. Um, and because that's not part of your picture, and I like it's great when they're not competing, but more one is a part of the other, and we've definitely gone down that road today. So
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate having places where conversations can happen, right? And I think that is a bit of a rarity these days, where it's very easy for conversation to be shut down rather than.
I've been kind of amazed, Michael, of how much we need this. I wasn't aware of it to the level that I am today. It's just, and it's different than writing, um, in the sense that writing does have that forethought to it, that trying to put it down in a manner that once you've written it and it's published, as you know, it's kind of unchangeable. Whereas in a conversation, you can have three thoughts at the same time and pursue all of them at quite extreme angles and have the chance to kind of have discourse on them. And to me, for me, it's a huge learning experience. Just like I just had no idea of. So, and I would never have met you. Fortunately I've met you in person. So like that's kind of how we first met. I'm really hoping we could do one of these again in 2026. And I was going to say from there, maybe we should, as I say now, land this thing. So with that, Michael Butler, PhD in astrophysics, has been with us here for 2 hours today. And I hope you've been able to enjoy some of the things that Michael has shared with us. I'll say in particular towards the end on quantum computing, I did find it very intriguing, this idea of counting versus measurement. So very thought provoking. With that, I'll say, one other thing, Michael. If people want to contact you, how would they get a hold of you today? Can they still get
Easiest,
you through apologetics?
yeah, and it's probably the easiest way for now. Um,
Okay.
um, I am in the process of, setting up other things, but that's sort of on the back burner at the moment.
Will you be at the conference in March?
I'm not sure.
Ah, okay.
So, yeah.
Well, if you are, I hope we can grab a coffee.
Yeah, I'd like that.
That would be very cool. With that, we're going to sign off now. Thanks very much again, Michael. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.